Houston and Hogan is back on the air again. I guess we're on the air somewhere. We're on the air
everywhere.
I'll tell you, a new one, and we're going to talk about it today. We are on the air on a new radio station, and we're going to talk all about that today because it's an exciting day here at Hot Mic with Houston and Hogan. I'm the Randy Houston part of that.
And I'm a little bit intimidated this morning or this afternoon or whenever folks are listening to this. I'm a bit intimidated because we have a guest. I think I'm in over my head. We have a guest who has some, even though he's a very young man still, has some tremendous accomplishments to his credit.
He really does.
Tell us who he is. You've known him quite a while.
Chuck Rice, welcome to Hot Mic. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be with two radio luminaries who I have admired and considered heroes for a very long time.
I'm glad I don't know the definition of luminary because I don't know what he's calling it.
It's the light that shines off your head when that glare. That's a luminary. Okay.
Charles, or Chuck as he's known, started his working career, Randy, just like you and me, in local radio.
Yeah.
Marshall, WMMH.
That's right, with Dean Shields.
And then in Asheville, at the station I worked at for many years, WSKY.
And Zeb Lee.
And Zeb Lee, and, you know, we had Zeb's sons on the podcast.
Yeah.
And talked about Zeb a lot, and every time his name comes up, I feel a little guilty that I did not appreciate Zeb as much when I was working for him as I do now. You also, after local radio in Marshall and in Asheville, moved to Raleigh and worked at one of the stations that anybody who knows media in North Carolina is familiar with, and that's WPTF Radio in Raleigh, the state capital.
Yeah, we protect the family. It was owned by Durham Broadcasting.
Really, is that?
Yeah, that's what, way back when. I've always been into how call letters came about.
Right.
And WISE was wisdom and service endures.
There you go.
I don't know why I remember that.
I forgot that. Yeah. I forgot that, Dave, and we worked there. Yeah.
I don't even know if I've heard that before.
So there's the pro in this room. There he is.
And, of course, WSKY is kind of self-explanatory, land of the sky.
And whiskey.
Yeah. Did the late Senator Jesse Helms not get his start at WPTF in Raleigh? Maybe on TV at a commentary.
WRAL.
Oh, WRAL.
WRAL. Channel 5, and I can't remember the FM frequency, but he did, WRAL.
Now, working at WPTF, you had an opportunity, I'm sure, to cover the state capitol and the governor, and tell us a little bit about your experience there.
Well, I was kind of thrown into the deep end of the pool there. The historic Jesse Helms, Jim Hunt Senate race, the most expensive Senate race in history, I think.
Brutal.
Was happening, and Jesse was my candidate. And so I followed him around the area for weeks, months before the election. And I was in the room when he beat Jim Hunt. It was a very close election. And then I would cover Jim Martin. Remember Jim Martin, the governor?
Yes.
A nice person. And
was he not from the Boone area? Or was that Jim Holzhauser?
That was Holzhauser.
Yeah. Jim Martin, I think, was from Charlotte area. But I would cover him. I covered Jim Hunt as governor. I would cover various local lawmakers and so forth. It was a really enlightening experience, but it was also something that really prepared me for my next step in my career was the Associated Press.
Tell us how that came about, going from WPTF in Raleigh to, I guess, Washington was your home base for the Associated Press, and just about anybody recognizes AP or the Associated Press. one of the premier
Yes.
news gathering and reporting organizations in the world.
Amen.
Tell us about the Associated Press.
I've never quite told this story, and I'm a little hesitant to tell it right now because it's a little bit embarrassing. But I went to D.C. to see a play, just to go up, and I also have relatives there, so I went up to see them. And when I was in D.C., I wanted to see the Associated Press because WPTF was an affiliate of UPI and AP. So I got a tour of the place and never did see the play. Went back to my aunt's house. This was just after the first of the year, so she had a couple of bottles of champagne there. And we just started drinking champagne. About an hour into this drinking champagne, I got a call from the AP, the managing editor, and he said, we would like for you to come in and take our test. We were impressed when you came for the tour, and I had no objective to work there. I just came in for a tour. And I said, sure, tomorrow. And he said, if you can come this afternoon, it would be great. I was very relaxed when I took that test.
What was that country song? Drinking champagne,
Yeah.
feeling no pain.
Yeah. I had to get somebody to drive me over to D.C. I was in Arlington, and I was not able to drive, but I got the job.
Without the
That's a great
champagne,
story. That's
without
great.
the champagne, do you think you would have passed the test?
I don't know. It's I can't believe I got the job.
Tell us about the experience of working for the Associated Press and how long you worked for the AP.
I worked there 18 years, and it's been described as like being in the Marine Corps boot camp. It is pretty rough. You have constant deadlines. We had deadlines every 3 or 4 minutes throughout the 8-hour workday. I covered the presidents. I covered Congress. What I really enjoyed covering was space shuttle launches. I never covered a return flight, but I covered space shuttle launches. But the biggest thrill was going, not because it was in Las Vegas, but going to Las Vegas to cover the Consumer Electronics Show, because I love gadgets. And there's no way you can see everything, but you try to find the biggest new things. And that was a lot of fun, and I got to do that for about 10 years, covering the new stuff that was coming out and trying it out and so
Now,
forth.
when you say you covered these things, what does that entail?
That means doing news stories. Sometimes I would do print stories, but more often I would do radio stories. Radio stories, as you know, were very short. About 40 seconds is what they give you for an hourly newscast. Here's Chuck Rice reporting from Las Vegas. Boom. And then you would have me talking for 40 seconds using sound bites, using natural sound and so forth.
And it's easier to write a story of 40 minutes long than it is 40 seconds. To condense something and get all you want to say in that short period of time is really a challenge.
It really is, but it has prepared me for the future things that I wound up doing, because it makes you more efficient, and it makes you write really, really tight. You have to write, and you have to summarize things very briefly. 40 seconds, you're right. It's not very long.
And we talk about country music a lot on this program because Randy and I both have backgrounds in country music. And I've always admired a writer like Tom T. Hall, who could write a book in 3 minutes. He could tell a story and in your mind, it's a book.
Absolutely. What a
Old
talent.
Dogs and Children and Watermelon Wine is a good example of like a 3-minute song that tells a story that, in my mind, is like reading a book.
It really is, and there is an art to that. You feel like you're right there with Tom T. Hall as he's telling you about the preacher or someone else in his stories. And I think that's why I got into radio. I remember as a kid in Marshall, my grandfather listened to WMMH, and he had a little Motorola radio, yay big, and there was a light inside of the radio.
Yeah.
And I was like 5 years old. I was like, the people are inside there. That's where the people are. And it was really magic. It was really like magic. How are these voices coming across here, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like theater of the mind. And that's what Tom T. Hall did. He created this theater in 3 minutes for your mind because of the ability to tell a story like that.
And you got to see the whole play beginning to end. It's such a talent. You talked about growing up and your grandfather and the radio. That was me too. Mm-hmm. Grandfather and the radio. Mm-hmm. The radio was so important, and I'm much older than you are, so we go back to the 60s when we'd come in from the farm field and in time to catch the noon weather report. No internet, no cell phones, no phones, period. That radio was so important, and I've still got that radio sitting in my living room in there, in my museum here, and it's still tuned to 570, where he last listened to the weather report. It'll stay there. That's where it's going to stay.
Now, at noon at our place, we'd come in from hoeing tobacco or picking tomatoes. 12 o'clock, you listen to the Trading Post on WMMH.
Oh, yeah.
That's what we would hear. And my grandmother would listen to the obituary column.
The obituary column of the air, brought to you by...
Bowman Rector Funeral Home.
Oh, this guy's dangerous, Dave.
I've always loved small town radio.
That's what. Yeah, we love that.
You take when I was growing up, of course, working in Franklin first, and then in Murphy, and then up in West Jefferson. These small towns didn't have daily newspapers, so something like the obituary column.
Yeah.
Was very important and still is to people in those small towns.
It really is. The Trading Post, that we would sell that. Dean would sell that as part of the programming.
Our friend, Dave and our mutual friend John Anderson does a morning show on WPTF in Canton, and they have a live call-in Trading
It's
Post.
the most popular program on that radio station. In fact, it is so popular, they have it for an hour in the morning, and they record that and play it back at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
And you have come in here and you listen to it. You're a listener, and you have come in here and told me some funny things that
the
you
thing
heard.
about something like the Trading Post, and you take these calls from listeners who have something to buy or sell, and you hear the voice of real people.
Absolutely.
It's real people, and it's local. And I was listening one day, and this lady called, and she said, my husband died, and I've got 4 fishing poles and a tackle box for sale. Things like that. Real people.
It's real.
Expressing themselves.
So authentic. It really, really is. Yeah.
That's hilarious. We've all got stories of catching ourselves with our pants around our ankles, on the air. Because and the three of us together now, there's over 150 years of live daily radio shows, opening that mic 100 times each shift, and that's 100 chances for something to go wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And in country music, there's not a lot of really long songs if you have to step away for a while. But at WSKY, we would put Layla on. It's like 7 minutes. It would give you time to go do your business and come back.
I remember when Marty Robbins' El Paso came
Yes,
out.
that was about 4 minutes, wasn't it?
Yeah.
4:25 or
and
something.
jukebox operators didn't like it because jukebox operators like to turn over in songs. And Marty's song was 4+ minutes, which was, at that time, I don't know, what was it, about 1960, 62, when El Paso came out? At that time, it was extraordinarily long.
It was.
Because a lot of the records at that time, a lot of the songs were 2 minutes. Mm-hmm. Most of them would average about 2 minutes, 30 seconds. And then Marty comes along with El Paso, which gave you time to run down the hall and back.
And at WSKY, well, you were on Church Street, I guess, but were you up Northwestern
I
Bank
worked
Building?
both places.
Because on weekends you had to unlock the door, run down the hall, unlock the men's room door, and
Right.
run in, and then run back and lock everything back up. So
yeah.
Marty Robbins was a good thing.
And of course, computers, when they came along, you could stack your music and
Yeah.
let go from one song to the other
That's right.
if you wanted to, and take 30 minutes off and take a nap.
Mm-hmm.
I used to pull tricks I worked at the AM station over in the Tri-Cities, Johnson City, Kingsport, and Bristol. I worked at WJCW and one of the other stations in that complex. We had 5 stations. And I loved occasionally, DJs played tricks on each other.
Oh, yeah.
In the old days, the trick was to move the turntable speed from 45
Yes.
to 78 without the announcer or the DJ knowing it, and he'd have a record queued up, and he'd introduce it, but it'd be 78 speed.
But on both ends of that.
But I would slip into the FM station, and I would fiddle with the computer, and have you could do all kinds of things. I don't have the ability to describe what I did.
No, something that we would do sometimes at WMMH was you'd get the news cast was it was a long sheet of paper. Basically, you rip it off the thing.
Right.
And Harlan or somebody would be reading the news. You'd light a fire at the bottom of it, and it would slowly burn. And he's like reading faster and faster to try to get to the bottom before it ended. That happened to me too.
We're going to move to more serious talk and learn about your experiences developing community radio stations, not just here in the United States, but in other countries.
Yeah, I was looking to do something different after the Associated Press, and I happened to win this journalism fellowship program, to go to Mongolia for a year. And I went there, and what that was development work, teaching Mongolians how to do community radio news and things like that.
Just where is Mongolia?
Out of this world. It's far, far away. It's up in the northeastern part of Asia, sandwiched between Russia and China. It's about the end of the world is where it is, and cold as blazes in the wintertime, 35, 40 degrees below zero.
Wow.
What is the lifestyle of the local people in Mongolia?
A lot of them are herders, but a lot have moved into the city. Ulaanbaatar is the capital. You have what they call ger villages in the city. They're kind of like a ghetto. A ger is like one of these Russian yurts. They're round, made out of canvas and felt, and you have your possessions in there, and you can break that down and move to a different place using a yak or 2 yaks, and you pull your house along behind you. You break it down and pull it along, and you might go hundreds of miles to a different place out on the steppe or the plains. They call it the steppe, but it's the plains. And you're considered pretty wealthy if you have livestock, horses, sheep, goats, things like that. You don't see a lot of cattle. There were development projects there to develop a dairy industry, but they don't drink a lot of dairy in Mongolia. So I don't know how successful that was. But I was there for a year, and I was considered a backpacker fellow. And that meant I lived in Ulaanbaatar, but I would travel all over the country. There's 21 provinces, or IMAGs they call them. I was in 17 of them. And you would go to the far reaches of place. I went one time to the Gobi Desert in the dead of winter, flew in, the plane lands, the the earth is kind of crunching underneath because the temperature is so low. The room that I was supposed to get was not available, so I stayed in a room that had the windows knocked out. But I got a stack of blankets like a foot high. My toothpaste froze. It was so cold. The temperature at night was probably minus 40 degrees. It was, and those blankets really did come in handy. But it's very cold in the winter. The summer lasts about 3 days.
Wow.
But what is really interesting is in Ulaanbaatar, it's very urban. You see women walking around in high heels on the ice, because the ice is there from, say, September to May, June. And those heels dig into the ice, and they just walk like they're walking on a fashion runway or something. It's amazing to watch people walk. And I'm slipping and sliding and falling, and they're just walking along, making me look like an idiot, you know?
So you wound up staying?
I stayed for 2 years, and as a fellow, it renewed for another year, and then I wound up getting a job with an international media development organization called Internews. They're based in California, and went to Tajikistan, which is just north of Afghanistan. And I worked there for a couple of years trying to develop community radio, but it was not to be. It didn't happen.
Really?
Very difficult place to work. Everything was state-run. They didn't really want community radio, local voices on the air. We came close, but we just didn't manage. And I don't think it has ever developed a community radio there, even to this day. And from there, I went to the Caucasus and worked in Azerbaijan and Georgia, training journalists.
Not the state of Georgia in the United States,
the country.
The country of
yeah,
Georgia.
The country of Georgia, Tbilisi. And each of these places are so unique. The hiking and the horseback riding in Mongolia, the climbing up to glaciers in Tajikistan, hiking there on the weekends and sometimes going to such a high elevation you hardly can take a step forward. It's you get altitude sickness, because we would just go up for the week, just for a couple of hours on a Sunday, a day off. And then Azerbaijan has incredible rock art that's thousands of years old, and Georgia has dense forests. I was there just after the Russians had invaded, and for some reason they blew the tops off these mountains and just destroyed these beautiful forests for whatever reasons. And then I was in East Timor, which is near Indonesia, for a few years doing a development project. Beautiful waters there. The coral is just something. The snorkeling is incredible. I didn't do deep sea diving, but a lot of people I know did, and they discovered fish that had never been seen before.
Wow.
They would put it on Facebook and places, and then experts would say, "Oh, we didn't know this existed." But yeah, it's been a fun time.
Well, you are developing local radio in all of these places that you're talking about. I mean, going in and starting like I did in this bedroom, starting at zero and building a radio station.
Yeah, East Timor, we put a radio station on the air in this coffee growing region. And the main thing there was the lack of health care. So we started a program called Ask a Doctor. And they would bring in a doctor, and he would answer questions on the radio.
On the air.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've worked at stations that had a program similar.
Yeah, and it was very, very popular. I think the station is still on the air.
How did you overcome the language problem, the differences in language? Was that a big challenge?
I should speak perfect Russian today, because that's all I heard for 3 years, but I don't. Interpreters. Пожалуйста. The interpreters, and you never make your interpreter angry. Your interpreter is always your best friend, because they are your voice. And if they are angry at you, they're not going to interpret what you just said.
Number one.
Yeah, you work through interpreters.
Yeah, I've always wondered, I'm a big baseball fan, and as you know, some of the top players in baseball don't speak English, and they work through an interpreter. And often when I'm watching a baseball game, and they have to bring an interpreter out to the mound to talk to the pitcher and the coach, and I often wonder if they're interpreting it exactly,
Of course, yeah.
the way the pitcher is talking. It's interesting to me.
Yeah, when you're interviewing an interpreter for a job, you bring in somebody that you know speaks perfect Russian and perfect English, and they're kind of sitting off to the side, and you don't tell the person that's being interviewed for the job, and you interview them
With that person
with
in the
that
room.
person in the room, and
Okay.
they'll say, "This person doesn't know." We at one point we had an interpreter who would we would give them assignments to translate something, and it turns out they were handing the translation to somebody else to translate because they didn't know how, or they would use software to translate from Russian to English or English to Russian, and you could tell that they were using software. I mean, it just doesn't
The human
work.
touch was not there.
It was not there, and some of the stuff didn't make sense, and they didn't go back and redo it because they would have to do 4 or 5 pages, and they would just run it through the computer program, and it didn't work. So you really have to kind of have a little monitor over in the corner watching and saying, yeah, this person's good, or no, don't hire him.
It's amazing to me in the traveling that I did quite a few years ago now in Europe and Russia, how so many people speak several different languages. I have a friend in Czechoslovakia, or what used to be Czechoslovakia. It's now the Czech Republic. Those two different countries now, Slovakia and the Czech Republic. And he speaks about 6 different languages because the countries are so compact, close together, and they come in contact with so many people outside their own country that, and Jan listens to our podcast over in the Czech Republic quite often. Hello, Jan.
Shout out to Jan.
Hi, Jan.
He speaks about 6 different languages, and he came to the United States to visit me. And we went to New York, and he became my interpreter because,
Yeah.
you know, in New York,
The southern
there
boy.
are Poles, there are Jamaicans, there are people from all over the world. And so he did more talking than I did because he could speak so many different languages.
That's right. I have given one speech in a language other than English. It was in Indonesia. It was in East Timor, and I gave it in the local language Tetum, but I spelled out everything phonetically.
Okay.
And I was so proud that I was able to do that. But it's the only time I have given a speech, and I just felt like it was important because I was talking only to very local people who only understood the local language, and I didn't want to go through an interpreter. So I learned how to. It's not a difficult language, but it is a different language, and so I just spelled everything out phonetically.
And you dealt with that language barrier in the broadcast realm too. So you were teaching people in another language to be on-air people who were reporting the news.
Yeah, and still doing that. We have a project in Malawi right now.
Yeah.
And one of the main languages there is Chichewa. And when I go to Malawi, sometimes I need an interpreter there when we're sending reports back and forth, which are kind of mentoring the journalist because you're asking him questions. Why didn't you ask this question of the person, the elected official or whoever? You put that, and then sometimes it will go through an interpreter there on that side. But mostly they do speak enough English to where they would understand what you're trying to say.
Gotcha.
And I really admire them for speaking my language.
Of course. Because it's highly said, one of the most complicated. Well, that brings us up to developing radio partners and what you're doing now, and we're out of time. What we should probably do is pick up again in another episode to follow and talk a little bit more about developing radio partners, talk a little bit more about WART 95.5 FM. And we're going to talk because we've recently been added to the lineup there with our podcast, Hot Mic with Houston and Hogan, every Saturday morning at 10:30. So we're excited about being on the air there at 99.5 or 95.5. And we're going to talk about the formation of that radio station and how it's providing a lot of great things for the community in Madison County. So we still got a lot more to talk about. Chuck Rice, thank you so much for spending time with us on Hot Mic with Houston and Hogan.
Thank you, Randy. Dave, it's a pleasure, both of you.
Be sure to click the subscribe button for another episode of Hot Mic with Randy Houston and Dave Hogan.